On July 26, 1939, the British began the 1,773-ton destroyer Nerissa of the N class. These ships were repeats not of the contemporary L and M class, but the previous JK class. This was mostly because while the LM class was in theory better, they were also slower to build and more expensive. Looking around in early 1939, the Navy realized it needed fast more than it needed good. Besides, the LMs weren't that much better. So the N class was started as a repeat of the JK class to speed construction. It didn't help much as the 8 meandered into service between late 1940 and late 1942 alongside the LMs. The main difference between the N class and the earlier JK class was that the aft mount actually faced aft instead of forward. Yes, they had an aft turret that faced forward. Also, they were completed with just one quintuple torpedo bank instead of two, the rear mount space being given over to a 4-inch anti-aircraft gun, a modification made to the JKs after they were completed. Wait, 3 twin mounts and 5 torpedo tubes? This looks like the British version of the later American Sumners, right? Nope. The biggest problem, as always, was that the main guns weren't dual purpose. This limited them to basically only having light and medium anti-aircraft. Even that was not good. More on that later. Of the 8 ships, 2 went to the Dutch, see the Van Galen class, 5 went to the Australians, and while nearing completion in October 1940, Nerissa was loaned, not sold, leased, or given, to the Free Polish Navy. Zooming out, this shows that even in 1940, the Royal Navy was already having a manning issue. She was finally commissioned November 3rd, 1940 as Piorun. Yes, that Piorun, but we'll get to that in a minute. Main armament was 3 twin 120mm 45 caliber low-angle open-backed gun mounts, 2 forward and 1 aft. Heavy anti-aircraft was a single open 4-inch gun between the rear control tower and the rear gun house. Torpedo armament was 1 quintuple mount between the rear control tower and the funnel for 5 533mm tubes. 2 depth charge throwers and a depth charge rail were fitted for 20 depth charges. Propulsion was provided by 2 boilers, venting to 1 funnel, providing steam to 2 turbines to produce 40,000 horsepower to 2 propellers for up to 36 knots. Types 285 and 286 radars were fitted, as was Type 124 sonar. Modifications were pretty standard for her class. While undergoing refit in late 1942, she traded her 4-inch anti-aircraft gun for the originally intended second quintuple torpedo bank. While undergoing repairs and refit in 1943 through 1944, she replaced her Types 286 radar for Types 271, 291, and 293 radars. She also had her depth charge stowage raised to 45. Upon entering service in November 1940, Piorun joined the Home Fleet and began escorting Atlantic convoys around home waters. In January 1941, she escorted the force trying to intercept Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, but they couldn't make contact, so returned to port. In late February, she went in for structural repairs to her fuel tanks at Clydebank, and while there in mid-March, aided in the anti-aircraft defense of the port. With repairs completed near the end of March, she returned to local escort duty until May 26th, when she took part in hunting the Bismarck. Charging in to make torpedo attack and risking friendly fire, she famously signaled "We are Poles" to the exhausted crew of the Uber ship. Afterward, she returned escorting local convoys around England until September. In mid-September 1941, she joined Garland along with many other ships in the Halberd convoy and sailed to Malta and back, returning to England at the end of the month. She spent October 1941 through October 1942 escorting Atlantic convoys before returning to England for refit and upgrade, which lasted until early December. She ended 1942 and spent the first quarter of 1943 escorting Arctic convoys to Russia. In the second quarter of 1943, she returned to home water escort duty and went in for repairs and refit. In June, she was transferred to the Mediterranean and took part in the invasion of first Sicily and then Italy until late November, when she returned to England for overhaul and refit. With overhaul completed in late January 1944, she rejoined the home fleet and took part in the various raids around Norway trying to get the Tirpitz. In June 1944, she was part of the D-Day force and intercepted a couple groups of small German ships trying to attack the landings, driving them off, but being damaged in the process. After repairs, in July 1944, she operated in the Bay of Biscay and the Channel, as well as escorting convoys for the rest of the war. At the end of the war, she took part in the liberation of Norway and the occupation of German ports. With the war over, she was returned to the Royal Navy.